This is Just Zach Ansbury Show.
So I suppose that actually sort of feeds into the next question, which is, some of the listeners of this podcast are, young, up-and-coming marketers. What sort of advice would you give them in order to help them, build their brands or help build their organizations and ultimately build their careers? What sort of advice would you offer them?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, but I mean, one of them is I think that you have to be willing to do some boring spade work as part of your job. I think that, when I was at Nabisco, it was drilled into us that we need to understand our business at the item level. Like as a marketer, I had to provide a volume forecast every month for the next 18 months or whatever of every single SKU that I had in my line. So I might have only had 30 of them, but I had to know. I literally knew every UPC code by heart by the time I was done. I still know my very first brand, Premium Crackers. I still know the UPC code for that main product, because it was just part of it was because we had products with a 4 to 6 month shelf life, and forecasting was extremely important, because if you missed your forecast, you had to keep the forecast tight so you didn't have product go stale. But if you didn't forecast enough, you would lose sales. So it's super important that you would forecast everything. What I found in most other companies that I've worked for is that no one looks at their data at that level of detail. And oftentimes, to understand what's going on when something's going wrong on your business, you have to know that. And I find that people generally resist going to that level of detail and trying to understand their business at that level of detail. I think it's critical to know that. And I have arguments with people all the time about what you should know and what you shouldn't know. And I just felt like, we were such experts at execution at Nabisco, and literally from production all the way to the grocery store shelves and displays, that was important for us to know this at the item level. I think the other thing to do is, to really understand consumer behavior. I think the laws of growth are a great way to understand, how consumers really behave. But it's also that next step of the trying to go that one layer deeper, right? Like if someone comes to you and says they want to sell you something, you should really be asking yourself, why does that work? And then maybe the third thing I would say, and I've done this a lot in my career also, is sometimes someone will say something to me, and especially if it seems a little weird, I always ask myself, is that really true? So if ever you feel something is a little off, you should be asking yourself that question and going to find out, is that really true or not? And there's been a number of examples in my career where people have said, oh, this is how people enter the category. And I'm like, really? I wouldn't have thought that. And then when I had the opportunity to investigate if that was really how people entered the category, I found out it wasn't. And it was just a belief we had. It was a reasonable belief, but it turned out not to be true. It was just something that, I don't want to say someone made it up, but I think it was something that they rationalized or thought, well, this must be true. And so it became true. And so you can get a lot of lore in organizations around something that is perceived to be true, and people are making decisions and acting on it, and it turns out not to be true. So what they're doing is ineffective. So it's really know your business at a very granular level. Really try to understand the consumer and what's driving the consumer. Literally every analysis I do, after I look at it and say, here's what's going on, I think about what does that mean about what the consumer's doing? And, so linking those two is super important. And then, if you have a question about something and wonder if something's really true, if you have an opportunity, follow up on it and find out if it really is true, because it might not be. And then you can actually now make new decisions that can impact your business in a positive way.